If you live in Portland these days, you're required by law to have chickens. These are our chickens. I want to tell you the story of an older man who lost his wife to cancer in the last few months during the COVID-19 outbreak. What happened was that his wife, who had developed cancer, got much sicker. The cancer spread from one part of her body to another and metastasized so that she was just riven with tumors right around February and March of this year. She was told that she didn't have long to live, that her situation was terminal, and during the outbreak, she was dying, actually, over the months of March and April and May. So during that time, when everyone else was worried about the coronavirus, this man, let's call him Joe, was worried about his wife, Crystal. I've changed the names, but this actually happened. And rather than locking down and social distancing, Joe was hosting family gatherings in their apartment. Crystal's sons and daughters and nieces and nephews came to see her, to say goodbye and to be with her as she died. And it was a long death in a way, given that she died painfully and how much she lost along the way to her final loss. So Joe, after losing his wife of 20 some odd years, and in his 60s, moved here. He moved to Oregon. He moved here because that's where his sister lived. And his sister, let's call her Sally, told him that she would be glad to help him get back on his feet, to take him in, but that she was very concerned that he might have COVID-19 because he hadn't been social distancing over those last 3 months. And when she talked to him about this, he didn't take the story of COVID very seriously. He hadn't been paying attention, and he's sort of an ornery type anyway. So when she asked him, are you willing to do take some steps like self-quarantine in order to make sure that you don't have the COVID, that you don't get symptoms? Are you willing to get tested? He didn't really show enough concern. He asked questions like, how is this even different than the flu? And why is this such a big deal? For Sally, this was very frustrating. She took COVID-19 very seriously, and she'd also been paying attention. So she knew that people who didn't take COVID-19 very seriously were certain types of people, and people who did take it very seriously were a very different kind of people and a better kind of person. So she was frustrated with her brother and wished that he would indicate to her that he understood the significance of COVID-19. Then once he got here, he did do what she asked. He took up a room in the Jolly Roger Motel, let's say, and self-quarantined. But because his cell phone was still in his wife's name, and he couldn't get the company to turn it off, he decided rather than try to switch it over anymore, he would go and get a new phone. So while he was in quarantine, he left his room and he went to a Cricket store and he got a new phone, and he called up his sister and he said, "Oh, I want you to know I have a new phone number, and here it is." And she was livid because he had broken quarantine. He had left his room. And she told him she was very, very angry with him, but she didn't have time to talk to him about it or explain because she was getting her hair cut. Because after all, it was June, and now the barber was finally open again. So I want to tell you about Glenn Loury, who's an economist at Brown. And in the 90s, I think around 1994, he wrote an essay about political correctness. And the idea in the essay was that political correctness works to help overcome an epistemic problem. That is, it helps people to understand and make their way through a world filled with counter-information, with lots of different kinds of speakers and lots of different kinds of claims. Often enough, when we encounter a speaker or read an essay, we don't have the time to validate an argument, to follow it all the way through, and especially if it has a lot of complicated twists and turns, if the logic isn't straightforward, we can't necessarily confirm it. Also, we certainly don't have the time to confirm a lot of empirical claims. So what we rely upon instead is signaling. We want to confirm the inner state of the speaker. We want to know if they're acting in good faith and if we can trust them that they have the same values we do. And so we look for certain kinds of speech, certain adherence to rules in order to be able to trust the speaker, in order to be able to trust that the person that we're encountering or that the essay that we're reading is filled with good information. And often enough, political correctness works.
Now, the kicker here, the thing that makes this work, is that in many circumstances it is correct to presume that people who don't share the value would be more willing to run the risk of ostracism by breaking the convention and expressing themselves in an unapproved way, a disapproved way. Right? It's the fact that it really is informative about the kind of person that I'm talking with to see whether or not they're prepared to labor over the gender pronoun, the third person singular, he or she. Right? I write a paper here. I use he throughout. And of course, I'm, playing with my reader a bit.
But sometimes we aren't in a position where we can simply rely on finding people who share our values because the information that we need is new or innately complex or not fully worked out. And I think when we think about the COVID-19 crisis, that's particularly the situation that we're in. We don't have good information. It's called the novel coronavirus because it is new. And the research being done on the virus and its infection rate and the fatality rate, all of that is coming in all the time from various sources that have to be parsed through and considered seriously. And we can't simply rely on political correctness in order to get the truth. So in that situation, political correctness can work against us. And certainly when it comes to the project of socialism, when it comes to making a radical and deep change to our society, we certainly can't rely on political correctness or figuring out the values of the person that we're talking to or who we're reading, because the values of socialism haven't really fully arrived yet. That's something that we hope to bring into being through revolutionary action. Instead, what we have to do is figure out a process of transformation. We have to figure out something like a transitional program. And in order to do that, we have to think deeply, argue persuasively and passionately, and keep our wits about us without getting too angry. I want to give you an example of the kind of problem that I think we're up against in this moment of crisis. To give you an example of exactly the kind of argument that we can't solve simply by determining whether or not the speaker is in the right tribe or is someone who shares our values. Specifically, I want to talk about or just read you a clip from Henryk Grossman's book on terminal crisis and the subjective factor. In other words, just how can a radicalized working class play a role in overcoming capitalism, and just what is the role that capitalist breakdown plays. And here's the clip, or the excerpt. If capitalists secure their income, then wages are insufficient. This is during a moment of crisis when the rate of profit has declined severely. So, again, if capitalists secure their income, then wages are insufficient, and an objectively revolutionary situation arises. The system shows that it cannot secure the living conditions of the population. From this objective situation, and through it, the class struggle intensifies. That is, the subjective factor, whether the working class through its struggle is capable of overturning the system, only becomes significant with the objective situation in this phase of development. Obviously, the idea that capitalism must break down of itself, or automatically, is far from being my position. It can only be overturned through the struggles of the working class. I think what I want to say is that we very well could be in a moment where the objective conditions are revolutionary. That is, because of the COVID-19 outbreak and because of the long-term tendency for the rate of profit to fall, we're entering into conditions where the struggle between the ruling capitalist class and the working class will become more and more apparent. And not only will it become more apparent to people's minds, but it will also become more and more intense, because the capacity for the ruling class to provide both for the workers and for its own reproduction and for its own capitalist class will diminish. And there will be an objective necessity for struggle. The two, it's a zero-sum game. The two sides will be set in opposition to each other, in fact. And it's in that moment when a radicalized working class will have to be able to come together and develop into some sort of political force, a revolutionary political force of some kind or another. And just what that will mean and what that will be and how we'll unify. These are questions that haven't been settled, have not been resolved, and that we'll have to argue about and we'll have to work through together. And if we're going to do that, we certainly can't allow political correctness to determine the outcomes of those debates for us in advance. Thanks for watching this Zer0 Books video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside Zer0 Books podcast every week and can get access to the Zer0 Books book club and help us to continue making online content from the left.